are wrapping up this month with the incredible Raymond Caldwell, who is the producing artistic director of Theatre Alliance in Washington, D.C. Raymond was also a resident director and lecturer at the Department of Theatre at Harvard University. He holds an MFA in acting with a focus on community outreach and new work from the Ohio State University, and he also holds a BFA in acting from the University of Florida. Not only that, Raymond has toured nationally and internationally as a performer, and also he has directed and developed work throughout the United States, India, Ukraine, Greece, Germany, and the UK. So Raymond is here. I'm going to be adding him to this video. So I would encourage all of you to ask him any questions that you may have, and this is an opportunity to interact with him, so please make use of this opportunity. All right, I'm going to be adding Raymond to this call right now.
Good morning. I apologize for my delay. I am so social media not a maven.
No, you are absolutely incredible, and I'm so happy to have you on this today, and can't wait to get started with our conversation and talk about a lot of things, Raymond. But before that, I want to tell you that one of the many gifts that one of our professors at UVA and my dear mentor Teresa M. Davis gave us during our time in grad school was our regular trips to DC to see plays, and most of them were at Theatre Alliance. And I saw Mnemonic, I saw Word Becomes Action Festival that you curated and produced, and also watched Blood at the Root, which was absolutely incredible. And we're going to talk a lot about that one. But I've been following your work ever since, and I really admire your commitment to socially conscious and thought-provoking work that is a reflection of the times that we live in. And thank you for agreeing to do this interview. It's an absolute honor to have you on this interview series and for our conversation today.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, listen, I love running my mouth. So thank you for giving me a space and platform to run my mouth. Thank you for supporting my work as well. Like that really means the world to me. So I'm honored to be here and so excited for this conversation.
Oh my gosh. All right. So Raymond, you are known for your dedication, clarity of vision, and a natural ability to inspire others. So I want to know about what drives you and inspires you to always give your 100% to every project that you do.
Oh, I love that. I'm a firm believer in our chosen family, our given family and our chosen family. And I am always so honored to work with a subset of collaborators who I just utterly love and admire, doing work that I think is so relevant and important. And I think the thing that drives me and has always driven me are the artists that inspire me, the artists that poured into me. I always have to recognize that I can only be here because other people took the time to pour into me, to teach me, to be able to point out my own ignorances. And so I want to be able to create that type of space, those gifts that so many gave me, I want to give that to other people. And so that's ultimately always what drives me.
Oh, wow. I love that. And you joined Theatre Alliance in 2017, if I remember it correctly, and you became Associate Artistic Director early 2018 and were named the next Producing Artistic Director in, I think, around November 2018. Did you have any idea coming in that within 2 years, your responsibilities would increase to such an extent? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I'll say this, that I joined Theatre Alliance with Colin Hovde because I really believed in the work that he was doing and the mission of the organization. And so I came in originally just curating a festival, and Colin and I started having a lot of really great, deep philosophical questions about theater and the purpose of theater and the use of theater. And when he decided to step down, and I want to talk about that, because when we start talking about releasing privilege and removing yourself, Colin Hovde, as a white man, looked around and said, you know what, I need to step down as a leader. I don't need to be leading in this moment. And so it caused the board actually to open up a search, and a search was done for the next AD. Now, I was an associate artistic director with the organization. Of course, I believed in the mission of the organization, but I also was a professor at Howard University. And so I had to take some time with myself to figure out, well, was this something that I wanted? And the truth of the matter is yes. I've always told myself that I wanted to be in a place of leadership, because I think that it is in this place that as a person of color, that as a queer man, I am able to affect the most change. So I threw my hat in the race, and I applied for the AD position. We went through a lot of rigorous interviews, but I was so honored to be chosen as the next AD. So I did not expect it, but I did expect it, and I'm so glad it happened.
Yeah, I am too. Do you miss teaching at Howard University? And are you still engaged in academia in some way, directing or guest lecturing?
Yeah, I loved my time. I was at Howard for 6 years, and it was perhaps some of the most beautiful moments of not only my artistic career, but my academic career as well. I went to PWIs, I went to the University of Florida and Ohio State, so I didn't know what it was or what the opportunity was to be at an HBCU. And I loved my time there more than anything. The thing that we always have to get around in academia are academic politics, right? That's always going to be a thing. But the reason that I loved it so, and the thing that I miss most, are the students. And I think the work that I'm doing at Theater Alliance continues to be a reflection of that. I am looking to always reach back, particularly because as an HBCU, oftentimes organizations aren't looking to reach back to HBCUs. So yes, I'm still completely involved at Howard in the ways that I can be. I'm still also teaching. I'm actually teaching a craft of acting course at UMBC this semester. Academia is and will always be a core component of who I am. I love the academic space. I love philosophical thought, and it's a core part of my artistry as well. So I do miss it. I do miss it.
And what was your experience curating the Word Becomes Action Festival? It was a series of new works, workshops, and conversations. I was there for the one in 2018, which is flipping the script. And I was really moved not only by the incredible work that was presented, including Samayani 24's The Blackest Battle, which you directed, but also the important community conversations that followed. So what were some of the biggest takeaways for you personally?
The Word Becomes Action Festival is the thing that brought me to Theater Alliance. And as I became the artistic director, it really became the center of the work that we're doing. This idea of new play development that moves us into community conversations. I think that's so essential. I think that curating work and presenting work that is creating intentional conversations is so fundamental. I think we exist in a moment where a lot of people are, and a lot of organizations are producing socially conscious, thought-provoking work to make money, right? They're doing it because it's the thing, it's the idea that's in vogue. But the thing that is true about socially conscious, thought-provoking work is that it's activism. And activism asks for responsibility. And so it was more than just presenting really dope work. And let me say this, the Theater Alliance presents dope work. We develop really dope work. And that's great for our artists, and that feeds our artist community in fundamental ways. But I think it's so important for us to have that connectivity directly to our community, so that our art is actually giving us the space to serve our community as well. This has always been the space that theater was meant to occupy. And so what happens in the Word Becomes Action Festival is audiences are given the opportunity not only to experience the art that Theater Alliance makes, but then also meet community activists, meet organizations that are doing that work so that you can get involved. Because I think that the most essential thing about socially conscious, thought-provoking work is that it has to move us to action. It can't be the thing that just makes us feel good. We can't just pat ourselves on the back and go, ooh, I had a good experience and I feel better. It has to charge us. It has to make us want to invest in our communities and to work within our communities. And so as an organization, we wanted to say, here are the resources, audience, that you can actually participate in. And this is how you too can join the movement. And that doesn't mean you need to be on the front lines holding the sign. That means that you can be at the organization folding and stuffing envelopes, because that's just as essential and just as important when we start talking about social change. It takes all types of activism.
That's great. And I'd love to know more about the work that you've also developed and workshops you've led in other countries too. Like you were in India. How did that come to be?
I've been working in India for a number of years now. I think my first trip to India was probably in 2014, 2013. I used to work before I was at Howard University, I was the partnership manager at Arena Stage. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I always wanted to do is Raymond Caldwell, always wanted to work internationally. I was born in Germany. I fancy myself internationally minded. And so I thought it was so essential that as Arena Stage was talking about American stories, that there were opportunities as well to center other countries. And so through the community engagement program, I developed a partnership with the State Department that took us to India. And we went to 4 different cities in India. I got on really well with a number of Indian artists while I was there. India was the last place that I ever thought that I would go. I always wanted to go, but on the list, it was always the place I never got to. And
Mhm.
now through this partnership, I got to India and started making friends. And I think that's so essential and so important. When I wasn't working, I was out seeing the theater that was happening in India. I was out in the community asking questions, wanting to get to know what was happening in Calcutta, what was happening in Delhi and Mumbai, and the fascination that I had with how different each of these cities were. So this led me to my deep love of my work in India. I started going back regularly just as an individual artist, and I started developing work with a number of NGOs in India. I'm fascinated by, and one of the first major conversations that I involved myself with was a conversation about gender-based violence and the
Mhm.
normalization of gender-based violence, particularly in India. And I started asking myself, well, why? And how is this happening within this community? What I began to realize, and in working with NGOs, with working with activists on the ground, in working with storytellers, we started to realize the ways in which gender-based violence actually had become normalized. And the normalization of violence, particularly in stories, is how ideas are propagated. And so when we started looking at classical Indian stories, we started realizing
Mhm.
what is centered often in classical Indian storytelling is gender-based violence. When we fast forward all the way to contemporary Indian storytelling, when we start thinking about the great shows that are on right now, what is happening often is a centering of gender-based violence. What we notice in many narrative arcs is a woman says no, and a man says yes, and then eventually the woman
Mhm.
says, okay, and then there's a song and dance about it, and everyone's
Oh my
happy.
gosh.
And,
Yeah,
and so we
that is so
started asking
problematic.
ourselves, how is it that we start transforming these narratives? How is it we start
Mhm.
transforming these stories? And we had an amazing time investigating it and attempting to create conversations. So this was one of many then engagements. I continue to go back to India. Actually, I've been back to India probably once every other year now. And we've extended conversations. So now not only are we talking about gender-based violence, the last time that I was there, we were trying to use art to have conversations about global ideas and global policy, particularly how we are reimagining our world and reimagining conversations about what globalism is, and particularly global diversity. And diversity in India is such an interesting conversation because when we ask conversations about diversity in India, those rules are seemingly different than here in America. So I am so interested in the work that I'm doing in India. I continue to go back and will continue to go back because it's become a second home.
Oh, wow, that is so exciting. I also wanted to ask you about Theatre Alliance's ongoing Strategize, Organize, Mobilize, Protest in Eight. For those who are watching, they are 8 short plays by emerging Black playwrights that examine legislative changes that can address the systemic oppression of Black folks in America, in line with the demands of the Black Lives Matter movement. So 2 of the 8 plays are already out, Reap the Reparations and The Obedient Mirage, which is about defunding the police. So how did all of this come together, and what was the process involved in bringing these wonderful plays to life in a virtual format?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say this, that Theater Alliance has always been known for developing and creating protest art. right? It is the staple of the work we do because we want to produce socially conscious, thought-provoking work. So when the protests began, when George Floyd was murdered, I knew immediately that I needed to respond. And so as I was down at protests, there was a whole moment. I was actually talking to my managing director and regularly saying, like, we're going to go down to the protest and we're going to create live theater. And the more that I thought about that, the more that I began to realize, well, if we were at protests creating protest theater, we'd only be creating a conversation with protesters, with like-minded people. How is it that we can expand the conversation? How is it that we can actually have a national conversation about what is happening? And have a conversation that allows for a little more nuance. Because I think the umbrella idea of Black Lives Matter is so fundamental. But then the ability to get very specific and start having very specific conversations about ways that we can actually improve Black Americans' lives. So I was really moved by these 8 core tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement. I reached out to 8 brilliant playwrights from around the United States and I said, hey, write a 10-minute play about this idea. All of them immediately responded with like, 10 minutes? Caldwell, are you serious? Like 10 minutes? That's it. This huge idea, defunding the police in 10 minutes. But for me, that's the power of art, right? For me, and this is what I told them, in 10 minutes, how do we start the conversation? Because the goal of art is to start the conversation. It cannot be the goal of art to solve the problem, because people solve problems. Legislative ideas solve problems. People moving legislation solve problems. But our art can only inspire and start the conversation. So we began developing each of these 8 10-minute plays. And we actually had plans originally to produce them. I had been having conversations with national parks all through DC. We were going to move from ward to ward. It's why it's called also a protest in 8 secretly. We were going to move through all 8 wards, produce under a tent, and take our protest to the streets. But as COVID continues to plague all of us, I could not do that responsibly. I couldn't put my artists at risk, and I, more than that, couldn't put communities at risk. When I thought about gathering people, particularly in predominantly Black communities, it would be irresponsible of me to gather folks in this moment while a pandemic is happening. But the conversation has to continue. And so we totally shifted goals and we started turning all 8 of these plays into short films. It was a way for us to increase the conversation, to push the conversation national. It was a way for each of the playwrights to think about the idea within their home state. So you'll see that each of the playwrights actually are representing organizations and nonprofits who are serving their ideas within their state. And then we as an organization are attempting to link all of these ideas back here in Washington, D.C., so that our audiences here in D.C. can also participate. So this is the genesis of the project. It got really big and it started moving so quickly. I told the team, I want to say 2 weeks ago after we finished filming, like, wow, that happened so quickly. And it's like, I had an idea, I blinked, and then suddenly it happened. But I'm so proud of it, and I hope that folks tune in because these conversations are fundamental.
Yeah, is there a way folks who are watching this can also catch the 2 plays that they may have missed?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, and we're getting that a lot from a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks who are like just tuning in now and they're like, oh no, I missed the first 2. So first I want to say, like, this was purposeful. We wanted to drop this protest a la Beyonce, right? Like out of nowhere, completely unexpected. Here we are protesting, because that is the way protest happens. We also wanted to produce the way we produce theater so that it inspires people to show up, and we start at 8 o'clock the way theater does. I will say that as we move forward, there are plans to release all 8 combined as one evening. So do look out for that. That announcement is coming up. But yes, there will be future engagements if you did miss the first 2. And if you missed the first 2, they were brilliant. So do check them out.
Yeah. I'm so glad. I'm so glad there's still an opportunity to watch them. And I've been meaning to have this conversation with you for a long time because I wanted to know, just shifting gears and going back to academia, what are your thoughts on the experiences of students of color in academic environments? And what were some of the things that you personally found problematic in your experience as a student?
Yeah, I will say that there is a real issue that plagues PWIs, and it is the experience of the students of color. It's a really difficult experience to be a person of color, particularly in academic space. And you know, I also want to point to the fact that academic space often is very hyper-liberal space as well. So there is this double consciousness that has to happen often for people of color as they move into academic spaces. An academic space is about a shared space for a collective of people to share their ideas. If you think about fundamentally what academia is, a professor comes in and has research and shares that research with a subset of students who also participates in that research, who also fuels that research. This is the core of like what academia has always been meant to be. Now, when you start adding race into that, when you add bias into that, when you add gender into that, a whole host of issues begin to spring up. Because what happens in that academic space is it no longer is safe. I no longer always feel safe to share my ideas. Because sometimes as a person of color, sometimes as a queer person, sometimes as you might be able to attest as a woman, there's this double consciousness that has to happen in that space. As I share my idea, I'm asking myself, oh, what are these predominantly white people thinking about this idea? And there's a nervousness in sharing that. Because will they invalidate my idea as a consequence of my race? Will I be attacked for this idea? So academic space can be very, very scary, particularly for people of color, as we have to create safety in these academic spaces. I will say that my experience at PWI is incredibly difficult. I will be blunt and honest about that. I will share that at the University of Florida, the thing that I absolutely admired about the University of Florida is that the MFA program, there's a BFA program and an MFA program. The MFA program were actually predominantly people of color. The University of Florida were recruiting people of color. So in my undergraduate experience, in my training, it was in fact not abnormal for me to see people of color in lead roles, right? This always did not trickle down to the undergraduate level. At the undergraduate level, you had to understand that these were Floridians coming to the University of Florida. Therefore, the BFA program, predominantly white, right? I remember specifically in my class, me and one other Black student. And so again, as I am performing in my coursework day to day, it becomes very difficult because I'm not always given Black roles. And then the Black roles that I'm given are so far out of the subset of my experience. So I am constantly, and people of color, Black people, Black students often are given August Wilson, thrown August Wilson. I think that that's delightful and lovely. Thank you for attempting to validate my cultural experience, my racial experience of America. But you're charging me to play characters that are 40 and 50 years old, and here I am, 18, right? So there's no thought about how it is we're actively and actually training then our students of color. But the cool thing about my undergraduate experience is that when we moved on to the main stage, as we were performing, I saw brilliant actors, right, in lead roles. And so it was really inspiring. But when I got to graduate school and I went to The Ohio State University, things were very different. As an MFA student, I was the Black MFA student. And here I was now in this predominantly white institution teaching predominantly white students. I specifically remember one of my earliest experiences at Ohio State, you know, the MFA students are charged to teach. I was teaching Introduction to Theater. And one of my classmates shared with me that a number of students had transferred out of my section. And she wondered why that was. And in small ways, we began to put together the fact that they were uncomfortable being taught by a Black man. if you think about Ohio, and so I got really in my feelings about this. It was, and I spent 3 years trying to understand it, grappling with it. So much so that by the time I got to my thesis, my thesis at The Ohio State was a thesis called Black Anger. When I first arrived at Ohio State, my goal was always thinking about global diversity and centering global diversity as my research area. But by the end, I had become so disenfranchised with whiteness and white space that my thesis had to be called Black Anger. And I had to request a Black faculty member sit on my thesis committee because there was not a Black faculty member within the faculty core of the theater department. So this is a very long way, and I'm sharing a lot and spilling all the tea, but all that to say, the experiences of people of color in predominantly white institutions are incredibly complex. They're not universal, but what is shared often is a sense of struggle, is a getting through it, right? And I don't think that that's universal for white students at the university level. And so the thing that I am thinking about, the thing that I am wanting universities to think about are how are we holistically giving even experiences to all of our students.
I had that reaction because I had that exact same experience of having to request for a particular professor, Lady T, to be at my thesis committee. It's unbelievable. This could be a whole 1 hour conversation, but thank you
Yeah.
so much for touching upon these points because I think it often gets overlooked and we don't give enough attention. But academia, it definitely needs to be a place where it is level ground for all the students coming in. So thank you for speaking to that. I wanted to ask you, what advice do you have for future and current artistic directors when thinking about season selection? Because this is also something that happens also in academia where season selection is problematic. So what are some important things that you consider when putting together a season?
Mm-hmm. I love that question because, I think that what currently happens is there is a centering almost of commerce. It is about making money for a number of companies and organizations. I will share that when we are choosing seasons, selecting seasons, I am attempting to think about what is the conversation I want to support my community in? And what are the conversations that need to be had? Right. And so I think that happens in 2 ways. I think that engaging in your community and knowing what the conversations are on the ground is so fundamental because I think it's so important for us to be taking those conversations into our cultural spaces, theaters specifically. When I think about a season selection, the other thing I have to center are what are the conversations we need to have? And it's the thing that we as artists are charged to do. We actually are supposed to be imagining our future, imagining what the future looks like. And so as I plan a season, I am thinking about just that. What is the future that I want my community to participate in, that I want my community to see? And some advice that I have for prospective artistic directors, because I want to see more people of color, I want to see more women leading organizations. This is fundamentally how change happens, right? And so one of the things that I have always said and I've always maintained is that I am a storyteller. And I am so interested and invested in the stories of not only my people, but stories that are complex, stories that actually make me feel uncomfortable. And that's my aesthetic. That's what I'm drawn to. And so I think the thing I invite for future artistic directors is to think about what it is that you want to say. What is it that is your aesthetic? And how do you push that idea into the world? And there are so many ways. I think that there's this idea, this misnomer, that you have to start by leading a large company. And I think that is false. I think that if you see a gap, make something happen. Make it happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a comment from the real Uncle Jeff, who says, I
Jeff!
can attest. to this experience, speaking about our previous conversation about academia, he says, I can attest to this experience having studied theater at a PWI and an HBCU. So thank you for sharing that, Jeff. Coming back to Blood at the Root, we have to talk about this play. Congratulations on winning the 2020 Helen Hayes Award for Outstanding Direction for this play. Very well deserved. I want to know, how did you approach this play as a director, and were there things you did differently in the rehearsal process?
You know, I always say that Blood at the Root will hold a special, special place in my heart because it was my first show at Theater Alliance, but also because it allowed us to have a really difficult and muddy conversation. Right. I think the thing that I absolutely loved about the entire experience was the team. It was such a diverse team. And what we actually did as we were going through the rehearsal process is we actually were facing and talking openly about our own biases. There were folks in the cast that were going through major shifts in their life as well. And so what we became is we became this family. We became a support system. We became a support structure for one another. And I think that was so fundamental as we navigated and created this world, because the world that Dominique Morisseau sets up in Blood at the Root is so complicated. It's easy to think about just race issues as a black and white issue and end the conversation there. But what Dominique Morisseau posits in Blood at the Root is that there are so many more nuances in this conversation that we have to actually take into account. And when we start talking about something like race and racism, we can't talk about that in very broad strokes. We have to get very hyper specific, and we have to get hyper local. If we're actually interested in investing and shifting this paradigm, then talking about racism, not as a national concept, but as something that's happening very locally, is so fundamental. And so what happened is we actually got to develop a world that was very specific and have a very specific conversation about what was happening in this community. And the thing that I loved about it is that as you watched the show, there were whole moments that you loved and appreciated each character. And then there were whole moments where you were like, why are you doing that? Don't say that. And that's who we are as people. Right? We're complex. There are things that are good and horrible about every single one of us. and so I'm interested in the stage as that place and that space for us, the audience, to watch that. And then to ask ourselves, well, in what ways am I good? And also, in what ways am I horrible? Because that's how we really become better people. So Blood at the Root was really, really special, but it was special because of the people. It was special because of the process that we jointly went on. And, you know, when the show opened, the show opened and I went to India. I was developing another project in India. And so I trusted the team and was like, y'all are going to do great. And so I never realized the impact of the work. And it wasn't until I got back that people are like, wow, I really noticed and watched and saw Blood at the Root. And it was the first time that I even had noticed people were noticing it. So that's Blood at the Root in a nutshell.
What were some of the moments that stood out for you personally in the creation of this play? Was there anything that struck you as, this means a lot to me, to you as a person?
Yeah, I saw myself in so many of the characters, but, one of the characters, Justin, in the play, really, really spoke to me because I think that there's this idea that Black people have a singular experience of America. And I think that that's a real misnomer. I think that that actually doesn't help our race conversations in America. And so what happens with the character of Justin is Justin exists outside of Black space. Black people have told him he's not Black enough. White people have commented on the fact that he's Black, and so he's constantly almost been an island unto himself. But when something happens, everyone naturally assumes that he should take the side of Blackness. And I find that concept and that idea really interesting. And I was really moved by this idea because I think that it takes all type of political philosophy and idea to move the needle forward. And I find this idea of, and what I think Justin really represents is, in one side of my own politic or understanding of race, almost a hyperfixation on race. And I understand there are a lot of racial injustices that we have not dealt with as a country. But if we think about it and we take race back to that very academic conversation, right? Race is a social construct. And so if it is the thing that we are constantly having conversations about, we constantly are shaping and shifting what race is. So there's a power in that conversation. So Justin, for me, brings up that. And I think that watching the actor Diamante Brewington unpack that character and discover who he was and how his racial politic perhaps was so different than a lot of folks, but still honor that was a real gift. So I loved that. I will say that I really loved that.
Thank you for sharing that. What would you say is your goal as an artist in terms of what you hope to accomplish in the work that you do?
I want to create work that actually inspires really big opinions. I really hope that no one ever goes to a Raymond Caldwell show and they're like, oh, that happened, right? I want to provoke a really strong reaction, because I think that is what art should do. I think that we exist in a moment as well where lots of art is very safe, because art is a commodity right now that's being bought and sold. But I think that as artists, we understand the real then power of art. And so I think that it is my hope that as my work continues to progress, as I continue to create more, that I constantly am creating work that is responding to the moment, that is asking us to think about questions, think about people in ways that we've never thought about them. And more than anything, that we are seeing complex characters and complex people on stage, that we aren't seeing cliches of good people and bad people, because we're all a little bit good and we're all a little bit bad. And so that's my hope for my work. I've always said that I was an actor for a really long time. I stopped acting because I didn't like being out front. And I think that being an actor asks for a bit of public comfort. And the thing I will share, I don't think that a lot of people recognize, is that I'm a complete introvert. I can present as an extrovert. I can pretend, that's that MFA in acting. But in all actuality, I'm an introvert. I'm introspective as well. And so I think that being a director has given me that type of space now, to still create art, to see what an audience actually is experiencing, and to make the conversation even more difficult.
Yeah, we have a comment from Kay Nicole, who says the best part about a Theatre Alliance play is the amazing conversation that happens after. I always leave pondering a new idea and questioning myself. That is an accomplishment in itself, right?
Oh, indeed.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicole. How are you, Raymond, personally coping with the pandemic?
Okay.
If you're an introvert, you must be having a ball, right?
And so let me say this. Yes, I feel horrible saying it. I really feel, I for a long time, for a moment, thought like, oh, damn, I think my energy might have caused this pandemic. Because I continued, there were a number of mornings I woke up and I was like, ugh, we've not had a snow day. And I was so angry in the winter that we hadn't had a snow day. And then COVID happened, and it turned into the snow day that never ended, right? And so I will say that, yeah, I have been thriving in this moment, but I think that's also because when I took over Theatre Alliance, everything was running, and I was running at 100 miles per hour. And I started realizing the ways in which I had not set up boundaries for myself. At that moment, the moment that you take over, everyone's like, oh, and do this, and can you do this, and can you do this? And so I started saying yes to everything. And so I was running and running and running. And then when the pandemic happened, I had to stop. And it was the first time in probably 15 or 20 years that I just stopped. And I was able to think about what it is I had done all the way up until this point, how I had gotten here, and even what I wanted to do as I moved forward. So the pause was something actually that I needed, that Raymond needed to have for clarity. You know, I will share as it gets longer and longer. I am so ready for it to be over. I am done, just like everyone else is. You know, for the first time, probably for the first time in 18 years, I've been unable to go home to Germany. So I didn't get to see my mom and my parents this year. And I'm facing the real truth that I might not be able to see them this Christmas and holiday season. And so that's weighing heavy on me. I totally am recognizing the loss that we are experiencing as a nation. And so I think that also is weighing heavy on me. And so I think that what I am attempting to do now, as I am an introvert and like thriving in this moment, I am trying to think about the ways in which folks aren't thriving and trying to think about the ways that I can heal and contribute to healing as we move forward. And so how am I using my art, my craft, as a space for not just my own healing, but the healing of my community, the healing of a lot of people that are hurting right now. So that's how the pandemic is for me. I totally recognize it's not great for everyone else, but that's been my experience and how I hope to use the moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What are some of the things you enjoy doing outside the world of theater?
Oh, this is a wonderful
It's my favorite question to ask.
Okay, so I'm going to say this, that, you know, that thing that I was talking about, that idea of like running constantly the second that I took over, my partner's very good friend, we were on holiday together, and she asked this great question. She said, Raymond, what are some of your hobbies? And I was like, oh, I like reading plays. And she's like, that's your career.
Yeah.
That's not per se your hobby. What do you enjoy doing outside of that? And so I'll say this, that in this, and tied to that last question, the pandemic has also asked me to think about just this very thing. What are my hobbies? I think I've spent so much of my career chasing my career that I didn't spend any time thinking or centering or chasing what it is Raymond was interested in outside of theater. So it's something that I'm working on now. I will share this, that one of my hobbies right now is my dog. I just got a dog. We got a pandemic pup. Her name is Delilah.
Oh.
And you know, she has been teaching me a lot about empathy, patience, and turning off. She doesn't care that I am in the middle of producing 8 different films. She's like, can we go? I am ready to play. I need attention and I need love. So she has been a bright spot in this, and now is one of my hobbies. I'll also say that I love a board game. I love group games.
Which ones?
All of them. So I really, I'm a big Monopoly kid. I love Monopoly. My partner just introduced me over the pandemic to Rummy Cube.
I haven't heard of this one.
I feel like a 70-year-old woman playing Rummy Cube, listening to my record player and drinking gin. It's fabulous. But I love board games, and so Rummy Cube is a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm down for any board game. I think that there is something about that sense of play that's so fundamental. I just learned how to play. Oh, what is that game? It's now my new favorite game. Oh, it's going to drive me crazy. So now I literally am going to get up and look at the title of this game. Oh, Settlers of Catan.
That can break friendships, relationships, so you got to be careful.
It can break
that game.
Yeah.
But that's a great game too. How do you think, Raymond, theater and storytelling will change post-pandemic? Do you feel inclined to explore a more hybrid model even after theaters do open up?
Yeah, I think that's a really fundamental question. It's something that even before the pandemic, I've been thinking about, and we've been centering at Theater Alliance. You know, I am really about transformative experiences. And I think that Theater Alliance, as part of its aesthetic, has always been about these transformative experiences. When you walk into the playhouse, the entire space is transformed and you are transported somewhere else. And so, to that end, I've been thinking about the ways in which I am not just creating theater, but I'm creating theatrical experiences.
Mm.
And so as we move forward, we're already planning season 19. We're in season 18 right now. We have commissioned a lot of work for season 19 already. And I think that that work is actually beginning to fuse in other artistic disciplines. I think that we, right now, for some strange reason, are all fighting for the same audience, right? When we start
Yeah.
thinking about the arts. And so how are dance audiences, theater audiences? How are opera audiences, theater audiences? How are jazz audiences, theater audiences? Because every single one of these artistic forms is looking to do the same thing, expand our cultural consciousness. And so how are we doing that cooperatively? How are we doing that together? I think that that is about allyship. I think that's about coming together. And so, yeah, I do imagine at least the work that I begin to produce really beginning to fuse in multiple artistic disciplines in the pursuit of a story, because that's so clear where we are as an audience now.
That's wonderful. Are there any upcoming projects that you're super excited about that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there are so many, we at Theater Alliance, we're trying to be very intentional about what it is we do and the work that we do. So yeah, we're starting with this Protest in 8 series, and this is how we begin our season. But I'm really excited for the remainder of the season. And as we move through the season, we'll get more and more local. So our next project actually engages 4 local playwrights to write short plays about each of the quadrants of DC. I'm really fascinated with DC and the stories of DC as the nation's capital. I think it's strange and odd that there aren't more plays set in the nation's capital. It is such a transient city. It is a city with such a rich and complex and diverse history. And the stories that are in this ground, literally soaked into this ground, aren't being explored. And so I'm excited for this quadrant series because I think it begins to open up our centering Washington, D.C. as a source and a place for storytelling. And then, we were supposed to end last season with Salma 24's The Blackest Battle, which you talked about. So you saw the
Yeah.
workshop production in the really
Hmm.
early phase of that at the Word Becomes Action Festival. We're so excited after 2 years of working on and commissioning this work. We are so excited to produce it in the spring, summer. Our dates are still soft because we want to be sure to
Yeah.
support what is happening nationally. But we want to end with The Blackest Battle. And I'm so excited about this, not only because it's a world premiere, but it also centers a theater form that I love, hip hop theater. It centers one of my favorite playwrights in DC, Salma 24, my homie, my friend, my family from way back. And it's a narrative about a complex narrative about Black on Black gun violence. And I think that that is such a fundamental conversation we in Ward 8 and Anacostia need to be having. So I'm excited for the season. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds incredible. In fact, Samahani is the next guest, kicking off the month of November with him. So
Yay!
very excited about that conversation too. What final question, because I don't want to keep you for too long. I know I've gone a little over a 45-minute limit. So what advice do you have for playwrights, solo performers with respect to the creation of new work regarding truth telling, including their own personal truths and also social justice?
I think that's such a fundamental question. I'm seeing artists working in this moment. And I think that that's so fundamental. I think sometimes, and the thing about artistry is that it really takes discipline, right? An artist doesn't clock in, an artist doesn't have a 9 to 5 where someone is holding them accountable. We are accountable for ourselves, to ourselves. And so I think first and foremost, creating is so fundamental. I know so many friends, I have a lot of friends who are playwrights, solo performers, creators, who are like, I'm a creator, I'm a playwright. And then I go, well, what are you writing? What are you working on? And it's crickets, right? You have to be in a constant place of creation. Even in those moments when you aren't feeling creative, what are the ways that you still are pouring into your creativity? I think the act of creation is fundamental. But then when we start talking about this idea of like socially conscious theater, socially conscious work, I think it's so fundamental that not only you create the work, but then you assess the validity of the work. Sometimes we create whole worlds that are serving us, the individual artists, and we're like, oh, this is truth. I think about a piece, you know, I was working on a piece a couple of years ago about prison reform. And here I was with all of the opinions and feelings and emotions, and I thought it was just so right. And I was having a conversation with a dear friend who was in prison reform and working in the space of prison reform. And she sat really quietly as I was talking about this play. And then at one point she was like, Raymond, you know a lot of that is bullshit, right? Or BS. Ooh, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on live.
Oh, of course you are.
You know, a lot of that is your imagining of the situation. But here are some things that actually are happening in the space of prison reform that might be more helpful. So I think that when we start thinking about developing work, how are we contributing positively to the conversation? Right? I think right now we exist in a moment where sometimes we are creating about the problem. We're creating about the problem. But what our art also has to do is it has to imagine the future. It has to actually posit things. It has to say things that might not be right, that might be uncomfortable, that might add nuance to a conversation. But I think that's so fundamental. So you can only do that by holding yourself accountable. So if you're saying that this piece, this play that you're writing is about prison reform, how are you taking that outside of yourself? How are you taking that piece after it's done to another organization and going, hey, this is about prison reform. Is this valid? And then how are you in a place as an artist to listen, to take the note? Because let me say this, artists are horrible at taking notes. Yeah, I know it because I'm horrible at taking notes myself. Because the second we start getting a note, it's an attack to us. It's an attack to the work that we love and the thing that we are trying so hard at. But we have to actually reimagine our relationship with notes. We have to reimagine that the people who are telling us these things, who are sharing their opinions, are actually our allies, are wanting to pour positively into the work. Because that's how you create work that actually moves the needle forward. That isn't work that is just about us sitting around, patting ourselves on the back, talking about the problem, but instead imagining solutions. And so that's my big push. That is what I hope that artists do, particularly in the space of socially conscious work, because everybody and the mother seemingly is wanting to do it, but they're doing it irresponsibly. So how do we do the work with responsibility?
Wow, I'm so glad you touched upon that. And KJ Rohan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says, that's a great note. Yes, and another yes. So,
Khadijah! Her name's Khadijah. I know Khadijah from way back. So,
oh, that's
hey, boo.
Khadija. But Raymond, this was such an incredible conversation. And for everyone watching who tuned in a little later, I'm also going to make this available on IGTV. So please go and watch the whole conversation because there's a lot to think about and a lot to unpack. Thank you so much, Raymond, for setting aside this time and having this beautiful conversation with me. And I hope to see the rest of the 6 plays that are about to come out and also catch the other 2 when you release all of them together. So I wish you all the best with everything that you're doing, and just wanted to say that you're a huge inspiration for artists like me too, who are writing and creating plays around the issues of social justice. So thank you for being that source of inspiration for us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you for creating this space. I think it's so fundamental. Thank you for giving space for artists to talk about what it is they're doing. This is so fundamental. So I deeply appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. I hope you have a great rest of your day and see you soon.
Yes, indeed. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.